Howdy and welcome to Inside Politics. I'm John King in Washington. Thanks for sharing your day with us. Stunning new abuse of power allegations. The Trump Justice Department seizing data from more than 100 accounts linked to lawmakers and others viewed as Trump political enemies. And is there really a bipartisan infrastructure deal? 10 senators say yes, they have an agreement. But most progressives say it is way too timid. And the White House is in wait-and-see mode. Plus, President Biden's first big meeting with world leaders. The COVID pandemic, the climate crisis, and cyber threats top a packed G7 agenda.
Be sure that we're beating the pandemic together and discussing how we'll never have a repeat of what we've seen, but also that we're building back better.
Back to that story a bit later, but up first for us this hour, Democrats on the House Intelligence Committee getting a briefing this hour on the scope of what some lawmakers already describe as a shocking Trump abuse of power. We know the Trump Justice Department took extraordinary measures to investigate leaks of sensitive information. Those measures, we now know, included subpoenas to Apple for data from accounts linked to at least two Democrats on the Intelligence Committee, Adam Schiff and Eric Swalwell. The subpoenas, first reported last night by the New York Times, were so broad they covered more than 100 accounts and sought data not only from devices used by lawmakers, but also staff, family members, even a minor child.
Donald Trump identified Chairman Schiff and members of the committee as an enemy of his. And just like Vladimir Putin or Erdogan or Xi in China, he used the power of government corruptly to go after his perceived political opponents.
With me in studio to share their reporting and their insights, CNN Justice correspondent Jessica Schneider, our chief congressional correspondent Manu Raju, and CNN legal analyst Carrie Cordero. Manu, let me start with you because this hour, number one, committee members getting a briefing, the Democrats, that some of them aren't even sure if they're subject to this. And number two, now some reaction from top Democrats in the Senate saying we want to know more.
Yeah, Chuck Schumer and Dick Durbin, the majority leader and the Senate Judiciary Chairman, who's also the number two Democrat, they are very clear. They want both Bill Barr and Jeff Sessions to come before the Senate Judiciary Committee and testify. That's the first time we're hearing that from Democrats who control Congress, control each chamber, and have the power to schedule hearings and invite witnesses. And we'll see how this plays out, because they're also threatening in the statement they put out. They say if they refuse, they are subject to being subpoenaed and compelled to testify under oath. Now, the Senate has procedures that require also bipartisan support in some cases for subpoenas, so we'll have to see how will the Republicans agree with this as well. But no doubt there's going to be a lot of questions being asked, not just of the past administration, but also the current administration. I'm told from committee officials on the House Intelligence Committee, which were the ones who were hit by these subpoenas, the two individuals, Eric Swalwell, Adam Schiff, their records being seized. They have a lot of questions to the Justice Department under Merrick Garland about what exactly happened, how many people were targeted, what exact records were actually obtained, what they were seeking. They say they have not gotten that information yet, so expect that pressure point to continue, those questions to continue. We'll see if the Garland Justice Department complies.
To that point, let's listen a bit to now Chairman Schiff. When this played out, though, back in 2018, 2019, he was the ranking Democrat. And we know it was Mr. Schiff, and we know it was Mr. Swalwell. The question is, was it more? Now Chairman Schiff says that's what he wants to know. Listen.
People got these notices, these emails from Apple, and thought they were either spam or that they were, some kind of a spear phishing attempt or something. And so I'm not sure that we know how many are impacted. I would like to know, we've asked the Justice Department.
Everyone's asking the Justice Department now, what more do we know about exactly what happened here?
Well, we know that the Justice Department has not talked directly at this point that we know of to the people potentially involved here. Congressman Schiff indicated that. What we've got from our reporting is that it's been legislative affairs staffers at DOJ and communication. We still haven't heard word from the Justice Department. It's interesting, John, because in just about 2 hours, the Attorney General Merrick Garland is scheduled to give remarks concerning voting rights. But we know there will be a room full of reporters. No doubt he will get questions about this. And to Manu's point, the question is, how does this administration handle it? Why didn't they alert Chairman Schiff? He got notice in May, we understand. Why weren't they spoken with more? Why weren't they alerted here? And so
let's walk through this. Carrie, this is your wheelhouse. And look, the government has every right to have leak investigations. The government has every right to try to protect sensitive information. The government, though, has rules it must follow. So we know 100-plus accounts targeting Schiff, Swalwell, staff members, family members, including a minor. A gag order on Apple at least 3 times, saying you cannot share, you cannot publicly talk about this. Where's the line? Where is the line between a legitimate leak investigation and something that crosses into an abuse of power?
So every time there is an investigation that in any way involves members of Congress, that is the highest level of sensitivity in any criminal investigation, including a national security investigation. So first of all, it should, in the Justice Department, go up to the highest levels of approval, including the Attorney General, to approve some type of action like that. Second of all, there's two warning signs that I see in this not being handled in the way that I would want to see something handled. Number one, it looks extremely broad. So if we're talking about 100 potential accounts, multiple members, their staffs, potentially family members, that indicates to me a lack of care in targeting specific timing, specific individuals, that this was a method of last resort. When it's this broad and this big in scale, that looks that this was not the last resort in terms of the investigation. The second piece is, how was this handled in the National Security Division, my old division, at the Justice Department? If I was the members of Congress, I'd be wanting to hear, not necessarily from former attorneys general, but from the current Assistant Attorney General for National Security, John Demers, who was the Assistant Attorney General during the Trump administration and is still held over currently. He's my former colleague. He's a national security professional. But given the fact that there was an individual brought in from outside of the National Security Division to handle this, indicates to me that there was a problem in terms of the proper chain of command and normal approvals that we would want to see in a highly sensitive national security.
Let's be more clear about that to somebody watching in the country who doesn't understand Washington as well and the procedures. Attorney General Barr at the time brought in another prosecutor to oversee this, as opposed to going through what you would believe would be the normal channel. Is that right?
So normally a sensitive case like this would be handled out of the National Security Division of the Justice Department. According to the New York Times' report, the former Attorney General brought in a prosecutor from someone else, not somebody with national security experience, not a seasoned counterintelligence investigator, who is the type of prosecutor that you would want on this type of case. That's unusual, and Congress should be asking the current Assistant Attorney General for National Security for whether he was involved in this and why that process changed.
And to Carrie's point, this was essentially an investigation that dead-ended under Attorney General Sessions. They had been pursuing this, and by all accounts, there was no records that indicated that anyone from the Intelligence Committee actually leaked any classified information. However, when Attorney General Barr took over, that's when he renewed this investigation, brought in that outside prosecutor from New Jersey, and said essentially, let's go back at this again. So that is deserving of question as well. Why, if nothing was really found, did Barr go full steam ahead anyway?
And this, I believe, tell me if you agree, is deserving of question, because I believe we're having a repeat of something we've seen far too often. Because this is, forget the names involved, just think about the significance of this. Forget the political parties involved. Think about the significance of this. Leader Schumer, Chairman Durbin want answers. The Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi, a Democrat, issuing a statement. The news about the politicization of the Trump administration Justice Department is harrowing. I support Intelligence Committee Chairman Adam Schiff's call for an investigation. I have not seen anything in my inbox, Manu. The Republican Party often complains about Big Brother, about the use of government, the abuse of government, too much government power. Crickets.
Yeah, and look, we've reached out to Kevin McCarthy's office, the House Republican leader. He's not responded. Neither Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell, no response from them. Also, the key members on some of the committees on Judiciary and the House and Senate side, we have not also heard back from them. And it's also unclear whether or not there was, if this was, it clearly seems like a partisan investigation going after the then president's very foremost critics. But there's still questions about whether Republicans swept up in this investigation. Right. So even the Democrats say we don't know if the Republicans were swept up in it. We've reached out to all the Republicans on the House Intelligence Committee and other as well. We have not heard back if any Republicans were affected by this subpoena. So it does at the moment suggest it is another example of the Justice Department going after its perceived critics and the people that Donald Trump was calling out, and news organizations that Donald Trump was calling out time and again.
And at least so far, again, forgive me, the Grand Ostrich Party sticking its head in the sand instead of asking what should be important questions, whether it's a Republican president or Democrat president, about the use of power, potential abuse of power. We knew at the time, let's listen, the former president, sometimes understandably, got hot about leaks.
I've actually called the Justice Department to look into the leaks. Those are criminal leaks. The leaks are real. You know what they said. You saw it. And the leaks are absolutely real. The news is fake. because so much of the news is fake.
We're going to find the leakers. We're going to find the leakers. They're going to pay a big price for leaking.
Again, this gets caught up in the politics, so help me from a legal perspective. Is there anything wrong? Let me try this one, yes or no. The president calling his attorney general, saying these leaks are damaging, you need to do something. Anything wrong with just that?
I don't think there's something wrong with the president asking the attorney general, are you looking into this?
If the president then says, I think it was Schiff or Swalwell, go get him.
That's a problem because that is political influence on an investigation. Unauthorized disclosure of classified information is a crime. The Justice Department does have an obligation to conduct investigations when there are breaches of national security like that. But the investigations have to follow standard investigative practice, and national security investigations are the most sensitive kind that you can have.
And your point is when you see 100+ accounts, that's the red flag for you, that this is a fishing expedition. Not we started with 1 or 2 accounts, we found a clue, we moved to somewhere else, and then we had probable cause to expand. If you start at 100 or you get to 100 pretty quickly, that tells you they were just looking under every rock.
That looks very broad. That looks very broad in terms of any type of national security investigation. But you're talking about, we're talking about the House Intelligence Committee, which conducts oversight over these types of activities. So the fact that it's lawmakers, staff, their families, that would lend towards being even more targeted and precise in the investigation.
And do we expect to hear more from these Democrats as they get briefed on the scope of this today, in the next hour or so?
This is a classified briefing, and they're all over the country, so we'll have to work our sources and reporting, and if people come on air and talk about it, even better. But at the moment, I don't think they're expecting a lot of information here.
Well, I'll be right here for 48 more minutes, and there's people behind me. If you learn anything, come on in. I appreciate everybody coming in. When we come back, we're going to dig deeper into this unprecedented way the former president appears to have weaponized the Justice Department. Stay with us. More next. Let's get some more now on the Trump Justice Department using subpoena power to target lawmakers and others the then president viewed as political enemies. The former president was never shy about pointing fingers when there were leaks of information damaging to Trump.
I think it was leaks from the Intelligence Committee, House version, and I think that they leaked it. I think probably Schiff leaked it, but some people within that, Schiff leaked it, in my opinion. And he shouldn't be leaking things like that. That's a terrible thing to do.
What we now know about what the Trump Justice Department did raises severe questions, including this one, whether this crossed the line from a legitimate leak investigation into an abuse of government power. And just this past week, there have been a number of revelations about conduct at the Trump DOJ that raise questions, including about whether it goes too far in its efforts to investigate leaks that angered Mr. Trump. With us in studio to share their reporting and their insights, Wall Street Journal White House reporter Tarini Parti, CNN senior political correspondent Abby Phillip, Axios managing editor Margaret Talev, and Washington Post congressional reporter Karin Demirjian. It's good to see everybody at the table. This is a tough subject. I want to start with what we heard there, because the president was never shy. Like him or not, watching at home, he was transparent all the time about what he liked and what he didn't like. He names Adam Schiff several times. He names the House Intelligence Committee. We now know House Intelligence Committee Democrats are meeting in just a few minutes to find out how many of them were targeted. The question is, where's the line between a legitimate inquiry and an abuse of power?
Yeah, it is absolutely the question. And I think we're going to find out a lot in the coming weeks and months. And one is, are the former officials, including the Attorney General Barr, going to come and answer these questions? Looking at people's spouses, their children, going well beyond these core issues around Russia, these are going to be some of the sort of obvious low-hanging fruit that investigators are going to want to know more about to begin with.
And it sounds, forgive me, it sounds Nixonian. It sounds the president's mad. The president is going to use his political aides to exact revenge and to look for dirt and to cause trouble.
Yeah, I mean, look, like you said, Trump has been very open about this, and tactically it's pretty extreme, especially that there was a minor child involved in this, as we've learned, right? But kind of Trump style to really go for the full court press, almost intimidation looking like tactic. I think a big decision line about whether it's an abuse of power or not, which it certainly seems like it is going to be, was anybody from another party targeted? Was anybody that, seemed to have a specific attribute other than they were the two faces that happened to be representing the Democratic talking points on TV the most, part of this net? But the surprising thing really is that DOJ seems to have gone along with it. I mean, this started under Sessions, who is the guy who recused himself because he was involved in the campaign. But it seems like there were some moral lines they wouldn't cross and others that they had no problem with when the president made his intentions clear.
Well, it's surprising in the world in which things ought to not be like this. But in Trump's world, I mean, this is how he wanted his Department of Justice to operate. And I think we still don't know for sure. We can't rule out that Trump said explicitly to someone at the Justice Department, do this thing. But we don't necessarily need that in order to know, as that clip that you just played illustrates. Trump was out there saying that he thought that these leaks were coming from certain individuals on the Intelligence Committee, certain Democrats. He was out there saying it publicly, and often in Trump world, that's all it takes. People around him take the context clues from what he says publicly, and then they go ahead and they act on what they know that he wants, what would prove loyalty to him if they were to act on it.
All right, to that point, let's just bring this in. Michael Cohen, many people watching will say, well, he's a liar. He has his own issues. He does. He has his own issues, without a doubt. But he has those issues because he worked for years side by side with Donald Trump and did his dirty work. And Michael Cohen says there's a code.
He doesn't give you questions. He doesn't give you orders. He speaks in a code. And I understand the code because I've been around him for a decade.
So the question, and it's a good question, was there a direct ask from the president to the Justice Department, first Attorney General Sessions, then the understanding of the reporting is this was then amped up under Attorney General Barr. Well, the now Vice President of the United States, when she was a senator, tried to get an answer to that question. Was there a direct ask?
Has the president or anyone at the White House ever asked or suggested that you open an investigation of anyone?
I wouldn't.
Yes or no?
Could you repeat that question?
I will repeat it.
Yeah.
Has the president or anyone at the White House ever asked or suggested that you open an investigation of anyone? Yes or no, please, sir?
The president or anybody else?
Seems you would remember something like that and be able to tell us.
Yes. The then Senator,
like it.
then Senator, now Vice President, is correct. But Mr. Barr, he was not there to cooperate with Democrats on any questions at that hearing. But that one now, important then, all the more so right now.
Right, and I think it goes to show if he gets called again to testify before any of the congressional committees, how he's going to respond to that question now, given what we know how he responded earlier. I think the other noteworthy thing right now to think about is what this means for the current Justice Department. It continues to put the current Justice Department in this awkward position where all this stuff from the Trump administration keeps coming up. And we know President Biden said he picked Merrick Garland for DOJ because he would be politically independent. And now they're facing all this pressure from Senate Democrats and how they sort of respond to this pressure that they're facing from President Biden and Senate Democrats.
It's not just awkward. I mean, people on the Hill are furious, right? I mean, like they've been in an awkward position to this point, but this is a personal thing for many of them. Look, they put out a public statement when it was journalists. They haven't put out a public statement as members of Congress. This is a real test and a potential crack in this relationship because if they don't do something soon, there's going to be a lot of anger that's going to just kind of metastasize in the days ahead.
Well, the current Attorney General speaks later this afternoon. We'll see if he says anything about it. The House Democrats are on the committee being briefed right now about the extent of it, so there's a lot more to be learned, including whether any Republicans will have the courage to speak up and at least say there are legitimate questions that have to be answered. You don't have to have a conclusion. Just be nice if you'd want the questions answered. Up next for us, President Biden and other G7 leaders get to work after what you see right there. A seaside morning class photo. The G7 summit now officially underway, putting President Biden's America is back mantra to the test. Take a look here. Earlier, he joined fellow leaders of the world's advanced economies for their first so-called family or class photo. It's a beautiful image along the coastline there. On the agenda in today's meeting, a focus on building a fair and inclusive global economy post-COVID pandemic. CNN's Caitlin Collins joins us now live from Falmouth, England. Caitlin, what are the big headlines today?
Well, it's not just building a stronger worldwide economy post-pandemic. It's also even just down to the granular level of seeing how President Biden is interacting with these world leaders, because this is the first time that we have seen world leaders gathered in this way since the pandemic broke out. Of course, it is a different president for the U.S. now that they have gotten back together. And you can even see in the body language as President Biden was walking up to that family photo just there, the differences in the relationships that often were the subject of so much scrutiny under former President Trump and how they are now under President Biden. He was incredibly intimate with the French president. He had his arm around him at one point as they were talking really closely, walking away from that photo. We heard from the German chancellor, who of course had a pretty fraught relationship with former President Trump, saying that she was glad it's President Biden here, talking about what she believes is his commitment to this multilateralism. And of course, remember, that was the same world leader that during that G7 in Canada in 2018, I believe was the year, where you saw at the end, they came up with this joint agreement. They're all supposed to sign it there at the end, and former President Trump refused to sign it. It was a photo that went viral where you could see German Chancellor Merkel with her hands on the table, kind of standing over former President Trump as he had his arms crossed as well, something that both sides later tweeted out, including John Bolton, the former national security advisor, standing there in the background, saying that Trump was standing up for America. You just aren't seeing photos like that emerging from this summit now that President Biden is here. But John, I do think it raises the question of substantively what is going to be different, because it's not just the diplomatic speak, it's not just the warm language. Do things actually change? Because they do have key differences still among these world leaders. And so they had their first session earlier. They have another one again tonight. The Queen is going to be present for the dinner later on tonight. And all of this is building up to that high-stakes summit with the Russian president later on next week. And we have been hearing from sources, John, we should note that right now we are not currently expecting Biden to hold a joint press conference with Putin after that meeting ends.
Well, that's a disappointment, although I guess I could understand both sides' perspective, but that's a disappointment from our perspective. Caitlin Collins, grateful for the live reporting. Let's bring it back into studio with our panel. And Caitlin raises key points. Number one, the optics do matter. The optics do matter. Seeing people getting along, seeing people together, meeting after COVID. Still, as we still deal with COVID is important, but there are substance. I just want to look at some of the headlines. The Daily Express, quoting the Prime Minister, Biden is a breath of fresh air. Oh, baby, what a lovin', says the Daily Mail. A little contrarian in The Guardian. Bitter standoff over Brexit sours the start of the G7 summit. Margaret, you write about this today in Axios. Joe Biden's first foreign trip as U.S. president is a carefully managed mix of multilateralism and message discipline so far, and a deliberate contrast to his predecessor's MO on the international stage. Yes, we all know Biden isn't Trump, but Trump enjoyed the disruption. He enjoyed criticizing and mocking some of his other leaders, sometimes to their face, sometimes at his press conferences, at these meetings. So that is different. The question is, to what end?
Yeah, Biden's already finding and has always known it's harder to put things back together than it is to tear them down or to shake them up. So some of the big differences that we know are out there that are going to be impossible to resolve in a summit over a couple of days in England. Nord Stream 2, well, it's happening, so I guess it's resolved. But trade, a lot of questions over trade. But some common areas, a shared belief between the Biden administration and America's European partners on climate change, and this shared desire to have some kind of an end to the race to the bottom on loopholes for taxing, right? So for corporate taxes, so companies are sort of running around trying to find the country to be the best deal, and nobody has any money in the bank at the end of it. These are some shared areas, but the main thing is, if you look at the order in which President Biden has arranged this trip, it is allies first, G7, right? NATO, EU, all leading up to that Putin summit. So that what he can try to show Vladimir Putin is, you mess with us, the United States, on cyber, on human rights, on our elections, you are messing with the entire Western Bloc. And that is very clearly his aim. Whether he's going to succeed, whether it will change anything, what the U.S. is prepared to do offensively for retribution, those are all questions we have yet to see the answers to, but that's what all the imagery and buildup is about.
Right. And so time gets to that effect in its cover, where you see the President of the United States, and if you look at his trademark sunglasses, in the eyes you see the reflection of Mr. Putin. And that is the big event at the end of the meeting. When you hear that there will not be a joint, or at least not likely to be a joint press conference, I can understand why the Russians might not want that. I can understand why the U.S. side might not want that. But if you remember, Donald Trump stood next to Vladimir Putin in Helsinki and said, well, he told me they didn't interfere in the election, and I believe him. I was there when George W. Bush said I looked into his soul. So that is always an interesting moment. Perhaps we will be denied that. But what should we look for? Should we look for much out of this meeting?
Out of the Biden-Putin meeting? I mean, I think that you need to look at the relationship is so broken at this point. And there's really, no easy way for Biden to try to heal it without looking like he's capitulating in some way. So in a sense, I think you have to look for what either one of them says coming out of it, and presumably it's still going to be fairly hostile going forward because there's an incentive for both sides to stay in a sort of, dukes up, fighting you're my enemy type of position. It makes them look way too weak at home if they do anything but that. And so given that state of affairs, I think it's going to be a lot of preserved status quo. And as Margaret was saying, it's more important that you see the healing happen on the home side of the fence. And the true proof of that pudding, frankly, is going to be after all of this traveling is done. I mean, you're talking about a bunch of countries that are going to be going into very uneven recovery periods, and that's going to strain their relationships, especially when trade issues are on the table, especially when questions about vaccines, questions about travel are on the table, and that's all going to affect the nice feeling that we come out of this week with.
We'll see, yes, as the clock ticks. We need to end this conversation there because when we come back, working on some breaking news, the Biden Justice Department taking steps now to investigate what the Trump Justice Department did to investigate lawmakers on Capitol Hill, lawmakers who, at least as we know so far, were critics of the former president. An important new development breaking now on today's major news story. We now know the Deputy Attorney General, Lisa Monaco, is asking the Department of Justice to investigate the department's handling of subpoenas in the Trump-era leak investigation targeting Democrats on the House Intelligence Committee. Let's get straight to CNN's Evan Paris. More information. Evan, what do we know?
Well, John, this is something that the Democrats in particular were asking for. Adam Schiff and Eric Swalwell, who were the two members, and of course, whose staff were the targets of these subpoenas. They want an internal investigation by the Justice Department, and that is what they're going to get. Lisa Monaco has now referred this to the office of Michael Horowitz, who's the Inspector General of the Justice Department, to look at the handling of this, especially, I think, the part that I think a lot of people at the Justice Department are uncomfortable with and are concerned about is the fact that this was a very broad, frankly, a fishing expedition that targeted not only the members, but current and former staff, and even their families. The fact that there is someone who was a minor, someone who was a teenager, whose device was part of this dragnet of metadata that was taken from Apple back in 2018 is something that is raising a lot of concerns. The question, of course, is why didn't the department do this earlier? We now know that this has been referred. I think Democrats are very, very upset that the Attorney General Merrick Garland has not really gotten on the phone with them to explain what happened here, what the scope of this was, and they don't really understand even still what exactly was under investigation. There's been a lot of displeasure on the part of Democrats that the Justice Department has not provided enough information. I think you're going to hear more about that. But of course, John, now that it's under investigation by the Inspector General, it may take a little more time for them to get some of those answers.
And let me walk through this with you in the sense that the Inspector General's name's come up several times in recent years.
Yeah.
Mr. Horowitz, he is well respected within the department. What authority does he have? As we know, this started under Jeff Sessions, then it was reinvigorated, if you will, under Attorney General Barr.
Right.
Democrats in Congress say they want answers from those two individuals. Can the Inspector General, does he have to rely on documents and staff members? Or if he has a question for Bill Barr, can he say, I need you in the chair, sir?
See, that's going to be the problem. There's going to be a record. There's going to be all the career people, that at least 4 people who are handling this, who are still at the department. John Demers, who's the head of the National Security Division, is on his way out the door. He cannot, Horowitz's office cannot compel former people to provide testimony. He can invite them and they can cooperate. But you're right. I mean, some of those answers may not be as forthcoming as the Democrats would like it to be.
Something we have learned before in other investigations. Evan Paris, appreciate the hustle on the breaking news. We know you'll stay on top of it. When we come back, 10 senators say they have a bipartisan infrastructure deal. Is it a breakthrough or will it be a bust? A group of 10 senators says it is succeeding where others have failed, meaning they say they have a deal on a big bipartisan infrastructure package. Now, don't schedule the ribbon cutting on that bridge just yet. Questions need to be answered as part of a wait-and-see response, a tepid one at that, from the Biden White House. The highlights of this plan, $1.2 trillion in total spending over 8 years. $579 billion of that is new spending. The focus goes on core physical infrastructure. Think roads, bridges, things like that. The 10 senators involved, you see them here, 5 are Democrats, 5 are Republicans. They say this can be paid for without tax hikes. Our panel is back with us now. And that, Tarini, is one of the big questions. The Biden administration's part of its tepid "we need answers" is how are you going to pay for this? So is this real, or is this just another bipartisan mirage and then we'll go partisan?
Right. The deal is new, but it seems the problem, I think, is the same, which is the pay-fors here. And that's part of the reason why the Biden administration in its statement said there are still questions that need to be answered, because the red line that the president has said for him on this deal is that he doesn't want to raise taxes for people making less than $400,000 a year. So the pay-fors in this current plan include indexing gas taxes with inflation. So that for the president might violate his red line. So I think, you know, this deal, of course, is still very new and we don't know all the details of it. But I think the White House is going to have a lot of questions about the pay-fors in particular.
And so the White House has those questions about the pay-fors. It also has a lot of incoming from progressives who say this package is too small, this package is missing a lot. The president is the leader of the Democratic Party, which means he'll get answers from that bipartisan group, but he's going to have to answer this question from Senator Ed Markey.
They have a package which is climate denial masquerading as bipartisanship. We can't have an infrastructure bill in 2021 that doesn't have climate at its center. No climate, no deal. That's the only way in which we can respond.
And so?
And he's not the only one, and it's not just the climate issues. I mean, remember where we started here. This was a bill that the Biden administration thought was going to include human infrastructure. It was going to include really a transformation of what we thought about as what the government's role was in incentivizing work and rewarding people who are caregivers, et cetera. That seems to be all out the window at this point. And so there are the Ed Markeys of the world. There are the Jamal Bowmans of the world, the progressives who say this is just way too small and we're chopping this down for Republicans who aren't going to vote with us anyway. And then I think on top of that, you also have a situation where it's not clear whether this bill is even going to get the votes that it needs. I mean, you may still end up going through reconciliation even with a bipartisan bill that's like half of what they
That's the plan B or plan C or plan Z, right? Bernie Sanders, the Budget Committee chairman, drafts a big reconciliation bill, and then the Democrats just see if they have 50 votes.
But that's exactly the question, right?
Yeah.
And look at the Democrats that are on this bipartisan panel. They don't look anything like politically don't look anything like the Ed Markeys and the Jamal Bowmans of this world. And you don't have a cohesive 50 with the Democrats.
So
you
come
can't
up
really
with
rely
a
on
plan that's a quarter of what the president wanted. Wait till he's on an 8-day trip. Drop it. Ta-da! It's basically done.
Maybe the president might want to stay overseas a couple extra days, let this one come down. Appreciate everybody.